So what would if you were having a conversation just on the street, I mean, you've obviously hit on a big one, from the standpoint of, okay, well, I can't endorse the papacy, certainly in the extent it has historically been done. Is there anything else you would say, all right, here's some, you know, uh, other nuanced differences that you would think are important to make?
Yeah, it's the complete acceptance of the juridical model that everything is about judgment and about clear distinctions. And so what I found in Roman Catholic theology that I'm not saying it's bad. I'm just saying it's sometimes I think they explain things a little bit too much. And so everything, whether it be my personal relationship with Christ, whether it be my salvation, is understood in the terms of a juridical model, where there is an authority, which is the Pope or the bishop or the priest who wears the hat. He makes the right sign of the cross, and then that is what frees you from your sins. And I take more of a uh, view, which I think is more in line with the fathers of the church, which is you have to allow the mysteries of God to remain mysteries. And I think that Anglo Catholicism does that beautifully. And that is, like, I remember when I was first investigating um, returning to the Anglican Church, I would ask priests and bishops and these theologians, what book should I read? And they're like, it's easy. It's the Book of Common Prayer. I was like, no, but I want to know what does the church think about this, this, no, no, no. The faith is the book, is the liturgy. The liturgy is the faith, and everything else, like that's the unity that we say we all want to have. In essentials, unity. That's talking about the liturgy, and then in non-essentials, liberty. And I think that when it comes to Roman Catholicism, and I don't want this to be like a bashing of Roman Catholicism because I think it's actually a beautiful
Right,
expression of the
right,
faith. If you're Roman Catholic, you should be Roman Catholic.
right.
But for me, these are the two main things that really separate me from, I think, maybe a Roman Catholic, which is I don't have an understanding of the papacy quite that the way that they do, and I'm not interested in overly defining every aspect of the tradition.
What I hear in you saying, and maybe you can speak to this a little bit, and there's been probably some other questions that can spin off of this. You earlier made a comment about you were, I can't remember if you referred specifically to an individual in the East or if it was just a comment to the East. But in hearing you talk about, not looking to just fully understand these mysteries of the faith, I at least hear a bit of an Eastern influence in your way of thinking there. Any comments, and then also, obviously, you left Rome. You could have, I assume, gone to the East. What any specific reasons that either that uh, didn't happen, or maybe it wasn't something that you gave much consideration to.
Yeah. No, I have a great respect for the Eastern Church. Even in my seminary training, John Paul II would refer to the Eastern Christians as the left wing, left lung of the church. And so it absolutely is an homage to this idea of orthodoxy itself. Orthodoxy means having right worship. That same basic idea. If you have the right kind of worship, you're going to have the right kind of faith. And so I'm very much in line with that. And the thing about Anglicanism is, as it developed in the last 400 or 500 years, there's been a kind of a sympathy between Orthodox Christians and Anglicans, at least up until about 1960 or 70, when kind of things went a little crazy in the Episcopal Church and in the Anglican Communion in a broader sense. But because really the concept is the same, which is we're going to celebrate the ancient faith, ancient practice. We're going to keep it the same. That's the tradition part in Anglicanism. Faith, it's scripture, tradition, and reason. That's kind of colloquially what we say is kind of the way of just defining what it is that we believe as Anglicans. But um, in a way, it's like, well, the bishop becomes the source of apostolic succession. And so there's a big push amongst Anglicans to get what they consider to be valid ordination. And so many Anglicans have asked Orthodox bishops to help consecrate their bishops, or Old Catholics. That's those Catholics who are very familiar with people who reject Vatican II. These old Catholics reject Vatican I, but they still had the faith and the ancient faith in practice. And so, from discerning that and the whole ecumenical movement, there is kind of an appreciation between the Orthodox and the Anglicans. When I went to visit one of the Orthodox churches here in Detroit, the priest there was very welcoming of me as an Anglican priest. And he said that when they first came here to America, it was actually Anglican bishops that ordained their clergy. That's how similar and how, you know, how they recognized each other as having both the ancient faith. And to me, that's important. That's kind of what it means. Sometimes people don't recall themselves Anglo-Catholic because they have a lot of anti-Catholic bias. So sometimes I've heard people call themselves like English Orthodox or Anglican Orthodox because they want to be more. But to me, I kind of am a branch theorist. I think that, there's Orthodoxy, which is obviously the Christian faith as it's, the traditional Christian faith, and also Roman Catholicism. And then supposedly, Anglicanism is supposed to be this third way, this via media. So it's between, um, you know, so we're very similar. So if you come to our liturgy, it looks like Latin Mass in English, but there's also some Orthodox parts of the liturgy that we have adopted. Um,
I
so I
think,
don't know.
yeah, I think that's a good, you kind of hit on a couple of things there that's, stand out to me. That's like, one of the things, for myself that, in moving towards whether we call it Anglo-Catholic or English Orthodox, there's a, for lack of a better word, a flexibility to where somebody can have more of that Eastern leaning. You can have someone that has maybe more of the scholastic mindset of Rome, and in the Anglican world, there can be a home there. It doesn't have to be an either or game, if you will. I'm not sure if that's been your experience or not, but I certainly can think of um, priests that I would say, would lean more towards that, Eastern Orthodox way of thinking than others who lean more towards a scholastic. And you're like, all right, it's not like if I were to be in Rome, not to say there's not Roman Catholics that aren't more mystical. There certainly are, but maybe to your point, kind of more of a general leaning towards kind of maybe more of a academic understanding of the faith compared to the East. And so again, within the Anglican world, there certainly is a place of, hey, I can marry those two together. It doesn't have to be. And again, I certainly don't want it to come across that again we're saying that if you're in the East, you're anti-intellectual, though there very well might
Right.
be.
Yeah.
And again, in the West, it's not that you're anti-mystery, but again, you just as general, comparisons there.
Yeah, I think that one of the definitions I think that one of the professors at Notre Dame gave once about what is Catholicism is it's never an either or, it's always a with and. And so the whole point of being a Catholic is to try to broaden the tent, broaden what orthodoxy looks like to include everybody, as most people as we can. But sometimes you have to draw the line. Can you have Eucharist without wine? Can you do it with grape juice? This sounds kind of like laughable to maybe someone who's not into the church, but that's a big issue with regard to what does your meaning, what do you intend to do when you're doing the sacraments? And I think that is what it means to be an Anglo-Catholic, is that a lot of Anglicans, they retained, the prayer book retained the Catholic liturgy in its kind of in it kind of its in its in a seed form, and then it allowed you to kind of uh, add to it things that you wanted or not, but the Catholic liturgy is found in there. It has it if you yeah it's exactly that what it is, but the beauty of, I don't know where I was going with that. I lost my train of thought there. Yeah, something brilliant, I bet. But uh,
It'll come back to you later.
yeah, I'll text it to you later.
Okay.
It'll be like at the end, it'll just be dubbed, and then Father
I'll
Jared says
just
something
read it.
really important.
We'll go back in and edit it. And Father Dillon meant to say this at that point in time.
Yes,
Well, again, any closing thoughts that you
yeah.
might have
The
for us,
the
whether related to your story, your journey, or just
I think the best way to describe what I was attempting to say with regard to the juridic model is look at during COVID-19 when it became quite apparent that we were all going to have to stay home and not go to church and fulfill one of the Ten Commandments, which is to worship God and to honor the Sabbath. in the Roman Church, the bishop with his mitre gave a dispensation to all Catholics and said, "I I actually absolve you from this obligation to go to mass on Sunday for the because it's for the better the good of the whole. There's nothing wrong with staying home in order to not spread infection. That's not the point I'm trying to make. I think that they should have done that. But my point is that I don't really know how a bishop can um, he can dispense from one of God's commandments. Uh, and so that's just a foreign thing to, I think, an Anglican, is to why one person would say, well, I can dispense you from like a fast, for instance, or like whenever um, St. Patrick's Day comes around, if it's on a Friday, around here at least, the bishops will give you a dispensation to eat meat on Friday.
Yeah. It's
Um,
interesting. It's interesting you say that. We're gonna have mass on Friday for the 4th of July, and normally it's like, I was thinking we're gonna do dinner afterwards. I was like, it didn't click on me that, oh, that's Friday, and you're like, oh, we'll do hot dogs, burgers, and then it's like, oh wait, no, we won't. And
yeah,
there's certainly, I think, when you begin to, in my estimation, when that becomes an acceptable paradigm, or I can relinquish you from, we can set that aside for whatever reason. If nothing else, like, well, maybe that wasn't all that important.
yeah,
Even if that's not the intentional message, it
right,
certainly can be the message received of, oh, all right, well, it's inconvenient on the 4th of July to not have a hot dog or hamburger. Well, I mean, sure, yeah, it is
right.
part of the point.
And I think that not that people like I don't want people to take this to be, well, I'm like a rigid person when it comes to the church rules. If you're sick, you can stay home. You don't need me to give you permission to do that, because as a Christian you have that ownership of your own faith, right? That you have an obligation to form your conscience in a way that is a Christian conscience, and that if you decide that you have the flu and you need to stay home, you don't need to call and get permission,
Right.
because it's Jesus is very clear about the Sabbath was made, well, man was not made for the Sabbath was made for man. And so there's nothing wrong with for instance saying, all right, I know it's St. Patrick's Day, or whatever, and maybe in some houses they have corned beef and cabbage. That's something that I think that you have to take ownership of who you are as a Christian, instead of just relying upon someone to give you some sort of magic juridical power that I don't even know. I don't know how that worlds. I mean, I guess it comes from whatever you bind on earth will be bound in heaven,
Sure.
but that's a pretty blanket, like,
Yeah.
yeah. So that's but
All right. Well,
well,
Father, I
thanks
appreciate.
for everything, and
Yeah,
yeah.
absolutely. I enjoyed it, and you have a wonderful afternoon. And if your missed thought comes to you later, we can always come back in and add that.
We will.
All
Sounds
right.
good.
Have a great rest of the afternoon. Thank you,
You
Father.
too. Yep.